Welcome to Health System CIO's interview with Kerry Bommarito, VP of Enterprise AI and Decision Intelligence at Mercy. I'm Anthony Guerra, founder and editor-in-chief. Kerry, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to be here.
All right, very good, Kerry. I'm trying to sort of zero in on really current stuff going on around the AI debate and AI questions, AI challenges, and projects. So I'm looking forward to chatting with you about that. If you want to start off, just give us a little background on your organization and your role there.
Sure. Like you said, I'm vice president of enterprise AI and decision intelligence for Mercy. We're a large non-for-profit Catholic system in the Midwest. We have hospitals across Missouri, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Kansas. We have over 50 hospitals across the Midwest. And I've been at Mercy since 2015 and working in the area of data science and analytics as we've really evolved into more of an enterprise AI strategy. And just excited to talk about what we're doing.
All right, very good. So in my mind, I'm sort of taking this in a kind of a few buckets in terms of the challenges people are facing. Obviously, one of the first ones is w- where do we go with this? What projects do we engage in? What use cases do we tackle? Um, you've got this incredible tool. Depending on how you look at it, you can look at it as many tools. There's the concept of taking a tool and an amazing tool and figuring out where to use it. There's the other approach, which is starting with the problems you're having and then looking for solutions to those problems. And I guess people do a little bit of both. But your thoughts on sort of picking the right places to start with AI, the right use cases, the right challenges. What are your thoughts on the best dynamic, how best to go about that?
Yeah, at Mercy, we've been really intentional on focusing on what are our organizational objectives for our fiscal year. And so we've just completed that process. And through that process, we've really honed in on specific areas where we are looking at what are the problems. And my involvement in that is how can we use technology and maybe AI to help solve for them. And so one of the areas that we're focused on right now actually is in the revenue cycle space. And so when we look at how do we solve for increasing denials, how do we solve for sort of that prior authorization process and the problems that can occur as you're trying to help the patient navigate testing and getting that testing approved all the way through to the billing process and how that affects not only our providers, the teams working with them, but then the patient themselves. And so we've done a lot of work on looking at that problem and then being intentional around designing solutions using AI to solve for it. So that's one sort of example, but really it is for us being focused on our objectives for the fiscal year and then honing in on what are those problems that we're trying to solve.
Right. So, the progression here, as you said, is it starts with what are your objectives? And that was probably a major endeavor that I guess happens every year. Tell me more about that. So, like, kind of let's start at the beginning. I guess that's sort of there's a governance play in there that's got to come down from the CEO.
Yeah.
And tell me about that process. If you were very much a part of that, or is that something sort of that was done and then you received sort of that wisdom from on high in the marching orders, and then it's time to operationalize things? How does that work?
Yeah, so it did evolve from our executive senior leadership team focusing in on five OKRs for the organization for the fiscal year. And then within those OKRs, developing out what the KRs will be. And then each of our senior leaders um, was assigned to be the trustee of the overall OKR. And then within those KRs, that work was spread amongst other leaders. And so For example, I am one of the trustees on an OKR that is very specifically focused on driving revenue cycle improvements through automation and AI. And so that's that, and so that's how that process at Mercy was currently evolved.
So it's interesting to me, you come up with, let's say, five main objectives organizationally with the CEO, all the senior leadership saying, here are the five areas we want to excel. One of them being revenue cycle. We need to do better in revenue cycle, and there are four others. Um, and but it's where my mind is right now is that AI is being pushed as the solution to everything. So as we look at these five, um, there's an there's a tendency to say anywhere there's a problem, AI's got to be able to help. So Kerry, you're in all five. You're everywhere. Like I could see a situation where you, Kerry, as sort of the head AI person, is like, you should be in every problem because we think AI can help every problem, but that's probably not true. What are your thoughts?
No, and we've I've had this conversation with our senior leaders and our chief data and AI officer. Obviously, um, messages this and supports this is that I think there's different things that we can facilitate. Some of those are analytics and what we kind of deem as decision intelligence and being able to provide um, you know, objectionable, but also, prescriptive information that then our leaders can use to help make decisions, or facilitate maybe even some technology decisions to help drive, um, you know, the results that we're looking for within some of these objectives. And so some of it is standardization of workflows. Some of it is, strategic decisions around technology implementation. Obviously, as healthcare systems, you've got your EMR, and what things that you can also look to your EMR, not only your EMR provider, but the teams that are a part of the development internally to facilitate those EMR workflows that can be very powerful. And so I just think it does. It depends on the problem. AI can't solve for everything. Obviously, there's a lot that AI can do, but there's a lot that it can't. And part of that is recognizing, I think, as someone who leads AI development for the organization, where even if it is solvable by AI, is that something we want to develop internally versus it's best to bring a vendor in to be a partner with us in that space.
Yeah, very interesting. So, another thing I was thinking about as you were talking is AI is sort of a layer that needs to work on top of an infrastructure of data, right? It's working on data. It does something to the data. So I saw some posts from Epic UGM. People brought to light that that's not getting maybe as much attention as it deserves. We're talking about what is going to operate on the data, the AI, but not so much about the data problems that are underlying. And that needs to be solved. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, so specifically to, data problems in the EMR, I mean, we could take that in, I think, many different directions. I think there's obviously governance is a very important part of, um, you know, data and its use in AI.
Hmm.
Obviously, how data is inputted into an EMR, the more that it's standardized, the more that people are able to use smart phrases, I think it does then lead down to its usability for products and surfacing insights or creating work queues to key off of. Um, uh, you know, I guess it sort of depends on the specifics on how you are looking to utilize the data. And so, can you, I guess, even elaborate more, or maybe you're just sort of leaving it open ended?
Yeah, I'm just, I read things and I get a general sense of what they're talking about, and I think the idea of what I read was there's underlying work here that is not being discussed enough around data governance and data quality. We're talking about the layer that's the AI that's going to
Yeah.
work on that, but we're not talking enough about getting quality data. At least that was my takeaway. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
No, it does. And I think that if you don't understand that that is a problem, then you will see issues with the use of AI.
Hmm.
And, that's where data governance, data quality comes in, but then also the AI governance and understanding, are there biases because of issues in the data or the quality of data or just even the type of data that was used. And what does that look like as you're trying to sort of govern that AI product that you're running over your data? It's important, I think, from a development standpoint, but then it's also important when you are engaging with a vendor
Hmm.
and their product operates off of a data spec that you're having to create for them, right? And they're assuming as they go and implement at different healthcare systems at different organizations, right? It's the same data spec. But, if your workflows, your data quality isn't similar, that needs to be accounted for as you're making sure that you're feeding this vendor, this technology solution data to actually create that product back for you.
Yeah, so you need to be cognizant of that at the health system because your vendor may not be. They're just trying to
Correct.
maybe move
Yeah.
forward, and you say, "Hey, wait a minute. Here's something we need to think about."
Correct, yeah. I mean, think about it from a coding perspective. If you
Yeah.
are bringing in a vendor to help with the CDI process, with the coding process, different workflows, different documentation processes at your system, is going to matter for that product. And I don't know that every vendor is able to solution around that. And
Hmm.
so I do think it's an important component for a healthcare system to be aware of as they're working on onboarding vendors and really working through that process, and testing out the product and making sure that they are taking into account the quality of the data, as they're working through that.
Right. So, speaking of vendors, the theory is that a lot of times health systems wind up using AI as it comes in through a vendor upgrade. So you have an existing vendor, they're putting out a new upgrade, and there's AI in it, and perhaps they have that communication hasn't happened, but it should. And I've spoken to people at health systems that talk about this is an interesting new dynamic in the vendor relationship, is that we need to know what's going on in an upgrade, especially if it has AI. And we need to know that because if it's got AI, we want to do different things from a governance point of view. It's not the same governance that it would have if it was a regular old upgrade. AI elements require a different treatment. And there's a lot of nuance around how much AI governance should be or needs to be distinct from sort of regular IT governance, where those things diverge, where they connect, where they might overlap. It sounds to me like this is all in flux at the moment as people are figuring it out, trying things, seeing that they may be suboptimal, and then making adjustments. Does that make sense? What are your thoughts on that whole dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI governance needs to be so from a Mercy perspective, our enterprise data and AI office stands outside of our IT organization, along with AI governance. And
Hmm.
so, I think AI governance, depending on how an organization is set up, it should be a standalone process. We have dedicated resources at Mercy that lead AI governance, around vendors just turning on new AI capabilities.
Right.
We've been intentional that in our contracting process this year, that it is built in the contracting language that the vendor, if that is in the future and they are turning on AI capabilities, they have to notify us and they have to give us the time to evaluate that. Mercy is a founding member of CHI, the Coalition for Health AI.
Yeah.
So we've set up, as part of our governance process, a review of vendor model cards. And, we're not looking to be blockers, but we're just wanting to make sure that, we're facilitating this process alongside the IT process, alongside the security review process. And we're just making sure that, we as an organization, we owe it to our patients to make sure that, we have an understanding of what it is that we're implementing, that we have the transparency, needed, that that we're following those responsible AI guidelines that, are being recognized nationally as we implement, AI solutions. Not only develop them, but yes, and to implement them from a vendor standpoint.
And this is probably a very basic question that may sound silly, but what is it about AI and the way it works that requires a fundamentally different approach from a health system? What is it about this technology that makes it different?
From a governance perspective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
why do we need a separate governance track? What is it about this technology that means it's not just not the same old things we used to do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so number one, there's obviously a lot of, United States, regulations and requirements around the use of medical devices, right? So number one, we need to make sure that the product, if it is used in a patient facing manner or clinician facing, that it's not operating as a medical device? And if so, that the product has undergone FDA approval. So, there's, I think, regulatory requirements that we want to make sure that we are following as it comes to the use of AI. And then I think it's just, the safety standpoint. We're not in an industry where right now you could release a fully autonomous agentic, AI solution in a clinical space. And, as part of obviously our principles around the use of AI right now at Mercy in the clinical space is with large language models, is that human in the loop process. And, making sure that the provider, our caregivers, have complete transparency. And so as we are working with our vendors and making sure that we're collecting, all of that information, that we're then educating our caregivers, our clinicians around the product, what it is and what it isn't. I think we need to be humble about what AI can really do and what it can't. And so, obviously, I'm a huge proponent of the use of AI, but I also know what it can't do, right now. And I know that's rapidly changing, but I want to empower people with the use of AI. It's so important. And I think, it can do, there's so many, positive things it can do for our, caregivers, for our providers, for our patients, that we want to see how quickly we can bring it in and be innovative, but then also, like I said, understand what it can't and what it can't do. And that's just so important to maintain that you have that insight and that communication and that transparency for those that are using it.
All right, very good. You mentioned the FDA. I had a medical device issue. I think that's an interesting issue. I had a conversation with a gentleman the other day. He was the CEO of a vendor, ambient scribe company, and that came up. That is a very interesting issue that the vendors are dancing around. Not. I don't mean to say they're being evasive. I mean they understand there's a line there, and I don't know if anybody knows where the line is, but they know there's a line, right? So if
Mhm.
you're a medical device, it's a whole different ballgame from a regulatory point of view. So I think what you're trying to say, or you tell me, is this idea that you have to make sure on your end, you have to take some responsibility that we want to make sure we're not using a medical device improperly. Even if the vendor's saying this isn't a medical device, don't worry. We have to also believe that And if we start to think that perhaps it is getting into that gray area, we need to figure this out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because it's regardless of what, they say, it's still your responsibility because you're the one using the tool.
Right. So that's an issue. That's just an issue to beware, to watch and think about, and deal with. Um, Very good. Let's talk about some of the other buckets. So we've got that sort of bucket of deciding what to go for and what to do. There's a lot of interesting issues around piloting and trying these things. Obviously, there's some governance issues there. There's issues I've talked to people about that have to do with pilot discipline. How long are we going? How much money are we going to put into this? In what set, like, how are we going to do it? What's the pilot? How long? How much money? And to be disciplined in the sense of not having it sprawl or sort of keep postponing the decision and putting more money into it. At some point, we got to decide: are we expanding? Was this a success, or are we done? I'd like your thoughts around that in light of an AI project. Again, it may have some unique elements where we've done pilots in the past, but this is a little different. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so from an internal development standpoint, of something that we may call a pilot, we're still building it in a way that it's more, you can think about it more of a platform. Yes, we are going to pilot. I want to prove out to our CFOs that we're, able to create a usable, um AI driven prior authorization product, and I'm going to pilot it in a specific service line with a specific set of medications. But as I'm building it, I'm looking at how can I create reusable microservices, agents, so that when we are ready to move out of the pilot phase, we're able to then scale quickly.
Right.
And so I do think sometimes pilots are important, just especially as you are on the more bleeding edge of innovation, and your end users, your leadership just need to see what's possible first before you sort of scale it out. But you don't want to have to then sort of rebuild from scratch.
Right.
And so from our perspective, it really is more around understanding the design and approaching it from a platform standpoint. And then, I think pilots with vendors, I think it depends on how that's kind of defined. If you're a healthcare system and you're looking to pilot it at one health hospital site versus, maybe it's considered a pilot because you're giving access to maybe a free implementation. I think there's, the technology requirements and the IT staff to pilot is almost, the same level of staff that you would need for a full scale implementation, especially if you're on one EMR.
Mhm.
And so I do think that pilots, um, can be useful, but I still think you need to be cognizant of the staff required to enable a vendor technology at a healthcare system. To pilot something is the staff can almost be at the same level of a full scale implementation. So, from an IT perspective, there's still just a lot of resources that need
Yeah.
to be dedicated just even to pilot something.
Right. So it's not a little thing. It
Yeah.
can be a very big resource intensive thing. So don't go into it lightly.
Yep. Yes.
And you mentioned the idea of creating sort of reusable technologies, reusable processes when doing an internal pilot. I thought that was a great point. I guess you could certainly see a situation where if you didn't do that intentionally, you could just create that sort of one-off and really not be ahead when it comes to expanding it and sort of do the work all over again. So it's a good mind frame to be in, right?
Yeah. I think in the past, as people looked at developing AI or machine learning, right, they approached each project as its own singular focused build. The code was developed just for this one specific need. And then, they move on to the next project and they start the exact same
Right.
process all over again. But when you're, I think, working with the build of AI within a domain, I'm going to probably talk about revenue cycle a lot just because we're doing a lot of work in
Yeah.
that. right? It's I think approaching it in a way, like I said, as a platform. And so um I think we're thinking more and more about that reusability. We create one thing that maybe summarizes a transition of care for a patient, and then we're able to utilize that product build in other types of transitions of care with limited rework and because we've already kind of built it out as a specific platform. I think it's the same thing with denials, for example. You could work on one specific, denial problem, try to pilot that out, but then you built it in a way that you can then scale it out to other denial types at a healthcare system.
All right, very good. And sort of the final bucket in my mind is measurement of effectiveness. Let's say we decided what we wanted to focus on. We've given it a shot with a pilot, and now we need to figure out if we've achieved significant enough results to continue or expand. I'm supposing you need some good before and after data. Make sure, and I've talked to other people about this, sometimes it can be a little tricky to get the metrics that you wanted, that you intended. Sometimes it turns out it wasn't the right metric to tell you. Sometimes it turns out it's harder to capture the metric you were after. And so it can be a little challenging sometimes to determine that success and
Yeah.
whether or not. So what are your thoughts around that, and any special distinct flavors that AI gives this kind of a challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. We do try to understand up front what is our value metrics and be intentional on establishing those with the goal of being able to measure those once the product is live. I think sometimes you may think you're going to drive a certain value metric and it actually ends up being something completely different. And
Right.
so you have to take that into account. I think though, if you are looking at approaching it from a what is the problem we're trying to solve perspective versus this vendor came to me and this is a really cool looking product and it sounds like it can help us, let's go ahead and implement it. And so I think it just depends on how the work, I think, sort of was established from the beginning. And if it was really problem focused, I think it can help you with that value story and determining what you're going to measure. I think some things are going to be hard, when it comes to trying to free up clinicians' time and really sort of reduce some of their burden on documentation in the EMR. That's a little bit harder to measure. You can do a lot of you can't really do as many quantifiable metrics as you can qualitative because they may be likely to use the EMR for another reason, right?
Hmm.
You've freed up the time that they have to write the discharge summary, but they're going to now use that time over here in the EMR. And so for some of these things, it is just going to be qualitative measures, but still important to understand that, that is driving provider wellness, transitions of care. And so, important to look for quantifiable metrics, whether they're revenue based or others, but you have to, I think, kind of be flexible sometimes and understanding that it may not turn out the way that you expected,
Right.
and you may be looking at other things that it could be driving.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like just one of the core dynamics that IT leaders continue to espouse is this reframing of being approached by a user with a technology, because
Mhm.
that's often what happens either at a vendor show or somehow they come across a technology and they come to an IT leader and they say, I would like this. I think this will help me practice medicine or whatever the case may be. And I continually hear sort of a best practice here is a reframing of, I understand you like this. Why don't you tell me what the problem is you're trying to solve for? Because we may have a tool for that. The tool you currently have may be able to do that. We may have a tool in a different department, or why don't you look at our core vendor for, it could be a million responses as the IT leader is trying to make sure that that they make the best use of dollars spent, so to speak, first,
Yeah.
right before, right? So this is a sort of a best practice reframing, would you call it?
Yeah, and I think in healthcare too, right, you may be trying to solve a problem with a product, but could you have used technology or AI to prevent the problem from occurring to begin with? And
Okay.
so I think it's also understanding and the process that is leading up into that problem, and where in that process would a solution to solve for it be best implemented? And then what is that solution?
Right. Yeah, and that makes me think, just as we close out our time here, that makes me think of just how important it is for IT leaders to have as deep a knowledge of operations as they can. And you don't expect a CIO or people in your position to know every workflow because there's so many specialties. But that's where your informatics people come in. They have to be sort of your advocate, your eyes and ears. They have to know those workflows so deeply that they can help match up existing technologies and solutions with the problem, right? So when somebody does express change from expressing the what they want in terms of the technology to describing the problem, ideally somebody that understands what technologies you have understands the workflows they're describing. And this is where the magic happens, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the operators too, though, they can be a part of the process because, they can work alongside the technology teams to answer questions, to sort of work through and understand the problem and all of those workflows. So the informaticists are so key for a lot of this work, but I think even with internal development, we have found that working alongside our potential end users, our leaders in that area, to be more of an engineering led development.
Uh-huh.
It's just you're able to quickly iterate
Uh-huh.
and get feedback directly from the end user, the clinician, and really design a product that
Yeah.
is for them, that you've built with them.
Sure. And the more it probably that is a continuous conversation, the more quickly you get to the right
Yeah,
place, as opposed to, well, here's what we want. Okay, let's
yeah,
go away and try and build. And they talk about this a lot in terms of iterating.
yes,
Iterate. Don't come back with a fully baked product because you may have missed the mark.
correct. Yeah, definitely.
There's lots of best practices in here, lots of things people should. I'm sure everybody's trying to do the right thing, but it's hard and sometimes people can get off track. And I think we've touched on some important things that they can help them. So, Kerry, I want to thank you so much for your time today, and I hope we can catch up with you again down the road.
Yeah, great, Anthony. Thank you so much.
All right, have a wonderful day.